European politicians and diplomats had already prepared for changes to their relationship with the U.S. in the event of a second Donald Trump presidency. Now that the Republican candidate has chosen Ohio Senator JD Vance as his running mate, those differences appear even more stark on prospects for the war in Ukraine, security, and trade. A vocal critic of U.S. aid to Ukraine, Mr. Vance told this year's Munich Security Conference that Europe should wake up to the U.S. having to pivot its focus to East Asia. He stated that the American security blanket has allowed European security to atrophy. Neil Schmid, a senior MP in German Chancellor Olaf Scholz's party, expressed confidence that a Republican presidency would continue to stay within NATO, even if JD Vance came across as more isolationist and Donald Trump remained unpredictable. However, he warned of a new round of trade wars with the U.S. under a second Trump presidency. An EU diplomat said that after 4 years of Donald Trump, no one was naive and that they understand what it means if Trump comes back as a second-term president, regardless of his running mate. The diplomat compared the EU to a sailing boat preparing for a storm, stating that whatever they might be able to tie down, it was always going to be rough. The U.S. is Ukraine's biggest ally, and President Volodymyr Zelensky said this week that he is not afraid about Trump becoming president and that they will work together. He also said that he believed most of the Republican Party supported Ukraine and its people. Mr. Zelensky and Mr. Trump also have a common friend in Boris Johnson, the former UK Prime Minister, who has consistently championed continued aid for Ukraine and recently met the former president at the Republican National Convention. Following the meeting, Mr. Johnson posted that he had no doubt that Mr. Trump will be strong and decisive in supporting that country and defending democracy. But even if that sentiment is true, it might not apply to Mr. Vance, who, days before the full-scale invasion, told a podcast he doesn't really care what happens in Ukraine, one way or the other. He also played a key role in delaying a $60 billion military aid package from Washington. "We need to try and convince him otherwise," says Yevhen Mata, the executive director of the Institute of World Policy think tank in Kyiv. The question for Kyiv will be to what extent he can influence the decisions of his new boss. Yevhen Mata agrees that Trump's unpredictability could be a problem for Kyiv in the run-up to the U.S. presidential election. The biggest supporter of the Trump-Vance ticket in the European Union is Hungary's Viktor Orban, who returned recently from a visit to see the Republican candidate after visiting Mr. Zelensky and President Putin, with whom he maintains close ties. In a letter to EU leaders, Mr. Orban said a victorious Donald Trump would not even wait to be inaugurated as president before quickly demanding peace talks between Russia and Ukraine. He has detailed and well-founded plans for this, the letter states. Mr. Zelensky has himself said this week that Russia should attend a peace summit possibly next November, and he has promised a fully ready plan, but he made clear he had not come under Western pressure to do so. Viktor Orban's recent peace missions to Moscow and Beijing have sparked accusations that he's abusing his country's 6-month rotating presidency of the European Council. European Commission officials have been told not to attend meetings in Hungary because of Mr. Orban's actions. During the Trump presidency, the U.S. imposed tariffs on EU-produced steel and aluminum. Although they were paused under Joe Biden's administration, Trump has since floated a 10% tariff on all overseas imports should he get back into the White House. The prospect of renewed economic confrontation with the U.S. will be seen as a bad, even a disastrous outcome in most European capitals. JD Vance singled out Berlin for criticism of its military preparedness earlier this year. While he didn't mean to beat up on Germany, he said the industrial base underpinning its arms production was insufficient. This will all pile further pressure on Germany, Europe's largest economy, to step up as a principal player in underwriting European security. After his much-lauded Zeitenwende, turning point speech in response to Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, Olaf Scholz was often accused of hesitancy on supplying weapons to Kiev. But his allies are always keen to point out that Germany is second only to the US in terms of military aid to Kiev, while it has, for the first time since the end of the Cold War, met the 2% GDP defense spending target, albeit via short-term budgeting. "I think we are on the right track," said Mr. Schmid.